毛地趴奶酪，毛地趴奶酪，趴地奶酪，毛地趴地奶酪，毛地趴地奶酪。
Hello everyone, welcome to NeoUnrealist. You know, I'm starting to wonder if there's more to what's going on in China than just a cold. You know, I'm not an expert in medicine or the history of a Chinese public policy with regard to, epidemics, but I've been around long enough to know that China has a lot of experience with epidemic diseases, and I mean, hell, China has in recent times, they have experience dealing specifically with the virus that causes SARS, which is more or less the family of viruses that this current outbreak belongs to. So we've had multiple opportunities since 2003 to see what China does in response to epidemics, of potentially lethal diseases. Remember, there's been on top of SARS outbreaks, there's been swine flu, H1N1, there's been MERS, foot and mouth disease, all sorts of nasty bugs to the point where, you see regular Chinese people walking around wearing surgical masks all the time. It's a common sight in modern times. Now, I don't recall China ever conducting house-to-house searches for infected persons and forcibly removing them to undisclosed secure containment facilities, do you? Now, I don't remember Chinese medical personnel being kept awake for days at a time, and then when they're on the brink of collapse, finally permit them to sleep in place, in their chairs at their workstation if they're lucky, or, on the floor piled together like sardines if they're not, in full hazmat gear, complete with masks and goggles on. I mean, have you ever heard of any group in history having to sleep in hazmat gear? I mean, maybe some of the guys who deployed years ago when they still suspected WMD were out there when they were on deployment, but I doubt even then, because I don't think U.S. or British military commanders would ever order their men and women under their command to sleep in their full protective gear unless they absolutely had to, unless they had some indication that they faced a potential threat from some agent. So just what is it that makes 2019 novel coronavirus different than previous coronavirus outbreaks, like the infamous SARS outbreak of 2003, that more or less the same government in Beijing, I mean, it's the same government in Beijing, mostly the same people. Obviously, some of them have been promoted since then, but they're acting in this radically new and draconian way. If you saw my previous video, I speculated on the possibility that 2019 novel coronavirus resulted from an accidental containment failure of viral material at the Wuhan Institute of Technology, the local protection level 4 virus laboratory located in Wuhan, and the only such facility publicly known to exist inside China. And the prevailing theory that the source of the contagion was the Huanan Seafood Market, that's completely fallen apart, people. I mean, the study released on January 24th by the Lancet, that blows that theory out of the water. The Lancet study, which was performed by a team of the actual Chinese doctors and researchers who are on the ground in Wuhan, show that the source of the epidemic was probably not the Huanan Seafood Market. The sample size of the study was small. It was only 41 people, but you have to remember, these were basically the first 41 patients who had confirmed 2019 novel coronavirus infections. So look here at the first 4 known coronavirus patients who showed symptoms. The first known case of coronavirus had symptoms first show on December 1st, 2019. That person, whoever he or she is, had no Huanan Seafood Market exposure. The next known cases of 2019 novel coronavirus after that first case, they don't even see one until 9 days later, a week and a half almost, people. That's when 3 more people were then known to have shown symptoms of the disease. So, of those 3, of the 3 new cases, only one of them had any Huanan Seafood Market exposure. So 3 out of the first 4 cases of 2019 novel coronavirus had no connection to the seafood market. Most importantly, I mentioned the first case, the patient 0 of this epidemic, as far as we know at this time, his symptoms happened a week and a half before every other case. And that person had no exposure to the Huanan Seafood Market. So after those first 4 cases, no one else, was known to show symptoms of 2019 novel coronavirus until December 15th, 2019, 2 weeks after the first case, who, remember, had no exposure to the Huanan Seafood Market. It's from that point on, from December 15th on, that you start seeing a bunch of cases that were connected to the Huanan Seafood Market. 2 on December 15th. 1 on December 17th, 1 on December 18th, 1 on December 19th, 5 on December 20th, and that's the first day things really start to take off. So what it looks like, in all likelihood, the first case, who again had nothing to do with the seafood market, no one got sick that we know of for 9 days after him. Unless there were other unknown coronavirus cases who were walking around before that December 1st case, very possible, we don't know. But given that the disease we now know can lay dormant without symptoms in a person for over a week and, as long as 2 weeks, this makes it extremely unlikely that we don't see our first case come out of the seafood market for 9 days, and then no other cases related to the seafood market occur for a full 2 weeks after the first case was known. All in all, of those first 41 cases, more than a third of them had no connection with Huanan Seafood Market. Only 27 of the first 41 had any exposure to the market, telling me that given what we know about the timeline of the first 4 cases, the guys who were way before everybody else, it's more likely than not that the Huanan Seafood Market, it's not where this epidemic starts. Furthermore, to beat down this eating bats caused 2019 novel coronavirus meme, the disease is centered basically in the lungs. It's a respiratory disease, primarily with transmission vector person to person, requiring, you to wear a mask, goggles, gloves, the whole 9 yards. Only about a fifth of those infected show any symptoms that could be called intestinal, like diarrhea. So I'm not a doctor or a PhD in molecular biology, but I suspect that a flu bug that you got from eating infected meat would have more of an impact on the intestinal tract than 2019 novel coronavirus seems to have. Basically, the way they were testing for this thing early on in that Lancet study was to take specimens from the lower respiratory tract of the patient. So if it's not showing up as transmissible through, say, your urine or feces, come on, people. This is basically a droplet or possibly airborne transmitted illness. So I've got news for you. Right now, ain't nobody eating bats in China, and they're getting sick at a faster rate than ever before. So for all the SARS was worse people, think again. It took 8 months for SARS to burn through its 8,000 patients. 2019 novel coronavirus should hit its 8,000th known case, at this rate by sometime tonight or tomorrow midday. And that's if you even believe the numbers coming out of China. The officials in Hong Kong, they claim the number of actual cases is something like 25,000. I've seen estimates, at the total number really infected being north of 90 or 100,000 cases. But, that doesn't even matter at this point. Even if you fully believe the official numbers being given by the Chinese government, 2019 novel coronavirus, sometime tonight or tomorrow by midday, will have infected more people in less than 2 months than SARS did in its entire 8-month run back in 02 and 03. So that brings us all the way back to where we started. Where did this plague originate? Now we know, thanks to the handy-dandy phylogenetic tree, that 2019 novel coronavirus, designated Wuhan Human 1 China 2019 December by the U.S. National Institute of Health, that it shares a common ancestor with two bat SARS-like coronaviruses that appeared in China in 2015 and 2017. Well, where in all of China do you have a known concentration of these two things? Bats, or at least bat tissue, and a supply of those two specific bat SARS-like coronaviruses. I mean, why? What do you know? It just so happens that at the epicenter of the epidemic is where that's located. The ground zero of 2019 novel coronavirus just happens to be the only facility in all of China permitted to store, experiment on, or work with in any capacity whatsoever the lethal protection level 4 organisms like bat SARS-like coronaviruses. So now, this isn't likely the first time you've heard about this. Everybody by now has probably heard about the Wuhan Institute of Virology and it being located in the city of Wuhan. But most of the people telling you this, in videos and online, they're relying merely on the Occam's razor theory to say it's, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's there, and the disease started in the same area, and the greatest number of infections are there, therefore it must be the source of the problem. Okay, so Occam's razor, it's not infallible. Sometimes things they just aren't that simple. But for my money, that's enough for me to already to suspect, to be true, that it's got something to do with the Wuhan Institute. But obviously we need more than just mere proximity. And I can go a lot further with this than I did in my last video because I've just seen a lot more documentation now. The Lancet study, which to date is the most authoritative document we have so far on 2019 novel corona, says the following. Both SARS coronavirus and MERS coronavirus, that's the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, they were believed to originate in bats, and these infections were transmitted directly to humans from market civets and dromedary camels, respectively. Extensive research on SARS coronavirus and MERS coronavirus has driven the discovery of many SARS-like and MERS-like coronaviruses in bats. In 2013, Ge and colleagues reported the whole genome sequence of a SARS-like coronavirus in bats with the ability to use human ACE2 as a receptor, thus having replication potentials in human cells. That last bit about a 2013 report by one of the colleagues of the Wuhan doctors and researchers for the Lancet study, a report that reported the genome sequence of a SARS-like coronavirus in bats with the ability to use the human ACE2 as a receptor and thus spread in humans. They even named the guy on their team who was involved in doing that work for that report, a Dr. Ge. That report, which they cite for their work, is titled Isolation and Characterization of a Bat SARS-like Coronavirus that Uses the ACE2 Receptor. And wouldn't you know it, son of a bitch, as Joe Biden would say, the lead author of that report happens to be Xing-Ye Ge. The lead author. It sounds like when it comes to bat SARS-like coronaviruses that can infect and spread in humans, this Xing-Ye Ge, he's probably the leading expert in all of China on that topic. Well, as it turns out, Xing-Ye Ge, he may even be the leading expert in the entire world on this subject, from what I can gather. In a 2015, a controversial report was published in Nature titled A SARS-like Cluster of Circulating Bat Coronaviruses Shows Potential for Human Emergence. Now, the lead author on that 2015 study that was published in Nature that I just mentioned was one Vineet Manakari, and much of the work was done by Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But you go down the list of authors, the co-authors on that study, and 9 places down you see, surprise, Xing-Ye Ge. Now, what was interesting about that 2015 study and what made it so controversial, this article in The Scientist titled Lab Made Coronavirus Triggers Debate. Let me repeat that for you. Lab-made coronavirus triggers debate. What did they do? I'll read it to you verbatim. Ralph Barrick, an infectious disease researcher at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, last week, November 9th, published a study on his team's efforts to engineer a virus with the surface protein of the SHC-014 coronavirus found in horseshoe bats in China and the backbone of one that causes human-like severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, in mice. The hybrid virus could infect human airway cells and cause disease in mice, according to the team's results, which were published in Nature Medicine. The results demonstrate the ability of the SHC-014 surface protein to bind and infect human cells, validating concerns that this virus or other coronaviruses found in bat species may be capable of making the leap to people without first evolving in an intermediate host, Nature reported. They also reignited debate about whether that information justifies the risk of such work, known as gain-of-function research. If the new virus escaped, nobody could predict the trajectory, Simon Wayne Hobson, a virologist at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, told Nature. In October 2013, the U.S. government put a stop to all federal funding for gain-of-function studies, with particular concern rising about influenza, SARS, and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS. National Institute of Health has funded such studies because they help define the fundamental nature of human pathogen interactions, enable the assessment of the pandemic potential of emerging infectious agents, and inform public health and preparedness efforts, the NIH Director Francis Collins said in a statement at the time. These studies, however, also entail biosafety and biosecurity risks, which need to be understood better. I'll stop reading there. If you listen to all that, the United States government put a stop to all federal funding for gain-of-function studies, of these influenza viruses, because according to the National Institute of Health director at the time, Francis Collins, these studies entail, that means it's intrinsic to the work, biosafety and biosecurity risks, which they didn't understand enough. The virologist at the Pasteur Institute in Paris told them at Nature magazine or journal, whatever it is, if the new virus escaped, nobody could predict the trajectory. It was just too dangerous. They created a chimera in the lab, a monster with the surface protein of the SHC-014 coronavirus that gave it the ability, to spread SARS in people. The debate came down to a guy, Richard Ebright. He's a molecular biologist at Rutgers University, and he said the only impact of this work is the creation in a lab of a new non-natural risk. But again, even the counter-argument of someone who was in favor of that kind of work going on, they made a statement that doesn't seem very convincing to me as I read it today, and undermined his case when he argued that the work was important because the results moved this virus from a candidate emerging pathogen to a clear and present danger. Look, I don't know about you, but if the United States government decided in 2013 that this kind of research was not worth the risk and stopped funding it, whether that decision was right or wrong scientifically, it certainly appears that we can now see the danger involved of a coronavirus spreading SARS in humans. But my point here is not to blame anyone for deliberately making 2019 novel coronavirus. Certainly not that 2015 research. What they created was not the virus plague in China today. I want to make that clear to you. My point is that while the U.S. stopped funding for that kind of research because it was too dangerous if the bug got out, clearly China is not so restrictive. Because since 2015, guess whose name keeps popping up on papers about the bat SARS-like coronaviruses? You got it, Xing-Ye Ge. And since 2015, these papers are in concert with colleagues at the, drumroll please, Wuhan Institute of Technology. Now you have sites like PolitiFact here in the United States. They keep trying to debunk the Wuhan Institute origin by strawmanning the hell out of it. They take the wildest, most uninformed and unlikely claims, and they knock it down as if that somehow ends the story. Coronavirus was created in a lab as a bioweapon for population control, PolitiFact wrote. I mean, this is what they write, that these claims are baseless and that they conflate the Wuhan coronavirus with other strains of the illness. Our friends at factcheck.org and Health Feedback debunk similar conspiracy theories. Hello, PolitiFact. Just because 2019 novel coronavirus is not a bioweapon, I don't believe it's a bioweapon at all. What they're doing is obscuring the fact that the likeliest origin is a simple accidental release. Look, Xing-Ye Ge and his colleagues, they do a shit ton of research on bat SARS-like coronavirus at Wuhan Institute of Virology. I seriously doubt that Xing-Ye Ge is a bioweapon scientist, otherwise the Chinese would never allow him to collaborate in studies with foreign researchers into work related to any potential weapon that he'd make. Basically, what I think happened here is the Chinese, who are proud of their new protection level 4 lab in Wuhan, it opened just a few years ago, they just didn't apply any brakes on the research going on. And as we've seen with China and in all other areas, like things like construction and food safety, their tolerance for safety standards is a hell of a lot looser than Western standards and certainly US standards. It doesn't have to be a bioweapon or a deliberate conspiracy to cull the Chinese population with a deadly virus. It looks to me like Wuhan Institute of Virology, they may have been doing perfectly legitimate scientific research. They ignored the risk or were sloppy that this risk that the U.S. government saw in messing with the bat SARS-like coronaviruses and trying to mix and match them to make new ones. And maybe some of it got out. I mean, not deliberately, not on purpose, just run-of-the-mill accident. Because there is no way any country would do this to itself. It'd be insane. No sane country would unleash this even on an enemy. Are you crazy? The conspiracy theory in China is that the U.S. made this in a lab and released it on them. That's more nonsense. We have millions upon millions of people going back and forth to and from China here. It'd be like roping yourself to somebody before you threw them off a roof. So once this thing is out in the wild, spreading and mutating from generation to generation, faster and faster as it burns through more and more hosts, there's no controlling it. I mean, let's get back on topic here. Just follow the names on the studies from the early 2010s till now. Xing-Ye Ge, Xing-Ye Ge, Wuhan Institute of Virology, Wuhan Institute of Virology, title after title after title, bat SARS-like coronavirus, bat SARS-like coronavirus, bat SARS-like coronavirus. Then ask yourself, of all the places, forget China, of all the places in the entire world where this bug first pops up, it pops up where Xing-Ye Ge, where he lives, where he works at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan. Now, before you think I'm pointing the finger of blame at Xing-Ye Ge and trying to paint him as some kind of villain, make no mistake, for all I know, he's the guy doing the most to stop this thing. I'm only pointing him out as the through line, the guy whose name keeps appearing and connects the Wuhan Institute of Virology to working with this virus. You know, it connects all those studies in China and outside of China. He's the commonality. And it's no surprise to me that if any place was going to have an accidental release of a bat SARS-like coronavirus capable of infecting humans, it's going to be the place where the guy who does the most work that I'm aware of in the world on bat SARS-like coronaviruses capable of infecting humans, where he lives and works. That's all for this NeoUnrealist. If you want to help the channel, do me a favor. Hit like for this video, leave a comment below, mash down the subscribe button if you're not already subbed to the channel, and click on the notification bell. It's very important you do that if that's what you want. You got to put it on the right-click it and put it on the all setting if you want to keep up with newer content. If you want to contribute directly to the channel and toss your hard-earned dollars or yuan into the tip jar, follow the links below to Patreon, Subscribestar, or PayPal. And if you watch this on BitChute, you can just click on the green tip pledge button on the video player. Most importantly, though, thanks for watching.